Good evening. I am Tawana Nobles, the president and CEO of the Tacoma Urban League. I want to thank each of you for tuning in tonight. You are in for quite the report. It's our 4th annual State of Black Tacoma report. I want to thank all of our sponsors for taking the time to support this event, for understanding the importance of providing this information to community. And I want to thank all of our speakers for presenting this evening and providing information on what it's like for Black Tacomans here in this county. You will be able to access this information on our website directly after this event. The full report will be available for you so that you can take action. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Thank you. In the Urban League movement, we have a 2025 empowerment goal to ensure that every American student is ready for college, work, and life. And we believe that at Tacoma Urban League. We offer a variety of educational programs, including our Girls with Purpose and Sisterhood in the City program and our Male Involvement program. Tonight, we're gonna dig a little bit deeper and talk about the state of Black Tacoma as it relates to education. And we are so honored to have Dr. Tafana Irvin from Graduate Tacoma, who will bring us tonight's report.
Hello, and thank you again, Tacoma Urban League, for hosting the State of Black Tacoma. It really is an honor to be here this afternoon with you all discussing education and economic mobility. As mentioned, I'm Tafana Irvin, and I have the pleasure of working with the Foundation for Tacoma Students. And as most of you know, our charge is to help every child achieve success from cradle to college and career. Today, I'm going to talk to you specifically about education and what it means for students and young adults in their journey towards economic opportunity and mobility. But first, you might have seen some of this today. I want to remind us and situate us a bit into the data of Tacoma. As we all know, Tacoma has a little over 212,000 residents in Tacoma, Washington, of which about 25,000 of those residents are Black. Now, my data doesn't go as deep to understand the 0 to 5 or the 18 to 24-year-olds, but Pierce County data tells us that about 8,700 students or young people are ages 0 to 5. 4,000 of our students are in the public education system, and there's only one public education institution in Tacoma, and that's Tacoma Public Schools. And throughout our county, there are about 11,500 Black 18 to 24-year-olds. I think it's important to understand the data because the context of what I'm going to describe today is about how do we mobilize to help every single person achieve success and understand where some of our barriers are. But first, I have to celebrate and start with our wins. What Tacoma Public Schools students, staff, administrators, paraeducators alike have done have really been phenomenal. Together with community partners and with a whole host of individuals, we've seen graduation rates rise significantly over the years. Most notable for us in this conversation is 90% of Black students are graduating from high school. It is something to celebrate. It demonstrates and showcases that when we wrap our services around our young people, we provide them with the resources they need, they can thrive. And we see that because they're walking across the stage and getting prepared for their next step. Now, while this is really incredible and we have to maintain celebration and momentum for high school graduation, the opportunity for us to go even further is now. And that is when we think about what happens to these young people who graduate high school and go on to their next step. Or more importantly, what happens when we don't support them? The data tells us that students who graduate from Tacoma Public Schools and go on to a post-secondary enrollment opportunity is around 41%. Now, recognizing that Tacoma Public Schools is graduating more students than it has before, it is preparing students for their next fit. It could be workforce or military, apprenticeship, internship alike, but the data today is about college enrollment completion and economic mobility. As a first-generation college student, born and raised in Tacoma, Washington, I have to tell you that I personally think that education is the path, a known path to economic opportunity and mobility. And for me, it was what actually allowed for me to break the cycle of poverty. And it was because I had support services and I was able to enroll into college, persist, and complete that I can speak about that today. Again, I know very well that post-secondary education is not the only path, but it is an important one. And when we look at the data, and only 41% of our students who graduate go on to a post-secondary opportunity, it begs the question of what happens to the remainder of those students. Now, when we think about what happens after they enroll, we look at completion. Our data tells us that from the numbers that have enrolled into college, only 37% of those students actually complete. I'm gonna do some off-the-cuff math for a second, but if we were to say 100 students graduated from high school and 41% of them went on to college, that means 41 students went on to a post-secondary institution. If we then took 37% of the 41 students, I think our data would tell us that only 15 students actually completed a degree or certificate. So if we sat with that for even just a moment, what we're saying is that of all of our students who are graduating, or 100 in this example, only 15 of them are actually completing a degree or certificate, which means that perhaps only the 15 are getting the real opportunity for economic mobility and opportunity in our community. That is where we have work to do. The data will also tell us that certain earnings are associated with students who go on to complete a high school diploma, some associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, or an advanced degree. This data is pretty recent in 2020, and you can see by the chart here that on average, a person who graduates from high school can earn about $42,000 or so. With some college, 47, but with a bachelor's degree, their earning potential nearly doubles. It is important for us to think about that in the context of why education is important, why we need to think about education supports and wraparound services, and why we, all of us in Tacoma, as Black residents and our village, need to support our young people doing something meaningful. Now here's where the data gets really difficult to read, and it's where I think us as a community have a lot of potential to really redress what we're gonna see. Currently in Tacoma and in Pierce County, you will notice very clearly that Black residents continue to be at the bottom of the income earning potential in our community. Earning only about $44,000 annually a year as a medium income, it demonstrates that we have work to do. Now, if we go back to the slides just a few before, you saw that if you received a high school diploma, you're likely to earn about 41. So what it tells us is that most Black residents in Tacoma or Pierce County are earning the potential of those who only graduate from high school. This is the work that we have in front of us. Education pathways, opportunities for advancement is exactly what our community needs to work toward. It's what we need to fight for, it's what we need to wrap services around, and it's what we need to think creatively about. As opposed to reacting to the challenges of our time, it's time for us to be proactive and think about what we need to do differently. With the help of Tacoma Urban League and so many partners around this community, I think we have the potential to do just that. My organization is going to continue to work on that, and we're going to continue to focus on what does the data tell us and what do we, as residents of this community, Black or otherwise, need to do to lean in and actually redress these inequities. While again, we understand that post-secondary education is not the only path to a good earning wage opportunity, we firmly believe it is a known path to economic mobility. Black residents deserve more than a median income of $44,000, and we believe that fully resourcing and supporting the whole child in their educational journey, cradle to career, will actually help us to realize that change. I want to thank you all for your investment, your time, your energy into understanding and unpacking all of the inequities that face our education system. I encourage us to dig deeper into the data. Certainly you can visit graduatetacoma.org/data to learn more, or reach out to me at any time. But if we're going to get to where we want to be, break cycles of poverty, and boost the wealth opportunity for Black residents, we believe it's in education. Thank you very much.
We believe that every American deserves to have access to quality healthcare solutions. We carry this out and work in programs like Leaders in Women's Health that we offer at Tacoma Urban League. Tonight, our Healthcare State of Black Tacoma report will be presented by Dr. Jamelia Sherrills-Jones with MultiCare. Dr. Sherrills-Jones, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
I'm very honored to be here to present an update on healthcare at the State of Black Tacoma Town Hall meeting. I'll start by sharing some gains or positive trends in healthcare that impact the Black community, followed by gaps. At the end, I'll speak about opportunities that we all can get involved in to ensure that the Black community achieves its highest level of health. To be frank, there aren't too many gains right now for Black people when it comes to healthcare. Black communities continue to experience significant disparities in healthcare outcomes for a variety of health conditions. However, there are a few gains today that I'd like to recognize and celebrate, as each positively affects the health of the Black community. According to MultiCare Tacoma General Hospital's Community Health Needs Assessment, which contains health indicator data within the TG service area, which is roughly Pierce County, 22.1% of Black residents in 2019 did not visit a doctor due to costs. It was too expensive for them to see a doctor regardless of how severe their symptoms were. However, preliminary results from our 2022 assessment shows a 9.3% decrease. Now, only 12.8% of Black residents in Pierce County report not visiting a doctor due to costs. This is also consistent with data that shows that more Black residents in Pierce County have health insurance, thanks to the Affordable Care Act. This is all definitely great news, as access to health care is important for staying healthy and preventing disease. The second gain is related to the COVID-19 vaccination rate among Black residents in Pierce County. Between May 4, 2021 and April 16, 2022, there was a 31.2% increase in the number of Black people who received at least one COVID-19 vaccine. This is in large part due to numerous efforts in the Pierce County community to provide education, address vaccine hesitancy, and increase access to vaccines, especially in BIPOC communities, which continue to experience higher rates of COVID infection. COVID vaccines can protect individuals from getting severely ill from COVID and hospitalization, which equates to fewer deaths. So it's great to see that there are more Black people vaccinated now, though we do have more work to do. And finally, I must recognize and gross substitute Senate Bill 5229, which was passed last year in the spring. It requires licensed healthcare professionals to do continuing education on health equity. Senator Tawana Nobles was one of the legislators who sponsored this bill. It recognizes that all health professionals, no matter where they work, have a role to play in promoting health equity within healthcare systems so that all people can have the best health outcomes possible. We will now transition to gaps in healthcare within the Black community. I want to begin by talking about disparities in maternal and child health, which significantly impacts Black babies and moms. This is a big topic right now in the media, and an especially important one that hits home for me, as I am a fairly new mom. Nationally, we know that Black women and babies are more likely to experience low birth weight, birth complications, and mortality at significantly higher rates compared to white women and babies. Locally, we see similar trends. On this slide, we see that the low birth weight rate among Black babies has increased slightly over the last 3 years in the Pierce County area, and that Black babies are significantly more likely than any other racial group to have low birth weight. Low birth weight is defined as a baby weighing less than 5 pounds, 8 ounces at birth. We see a similar trend with infant mortality, which is defined as a death before the first birthday. We see that the infant mortality rate for Black babies has also increased over the last 3 years, and that Black babies are significantly more likely than white babies to die before their first birthday. This is not always due to access issues, income, or education, as there have been studies done that have shown that college-educated Black women were more likely to have severe pregnancy or childbirth complications compared to white women with just a high school diploma or less. Clearly, there are other factors at play as to why we are seeing these disparate outcomes. Racism-related stress and implicit bias have been attributed to these disparities. Implicit bias is defined as unconscious thoughts and feelings that are usually stereotypical in nature, that a person harbors about people or things. It can negatively impact decisions that are made around medical treatment or cause the healthcare provider to ignore the patient and not listen to what they are telling them about their own body. The result is poor health outcomes for both the mom and baby, including preventable C-sections, postpartum hemorrhage, other birth complications, and death. Behavioral health and substance use is another healthcare gap within the Black community. For Black adults, the suicide rate has increased slightly between MultiCare's 2 needs assessments. As a disclaimer, I must point out here that public health data lags by 2 or 3 years. So in reality, the data that we used to perform our needs assessment in 2022 was collected pre-pandemic. Therefore, the data on this slide does not reflect the impact of COVID-19 on adult and youth behavioral health and substance use. We see here that adult suicide, youth marijuana use, and youth depression is increasing within the Black community in Pierce County. Black youth are significantly more likely to use marijuana compared to white youth. I'm not showing this here on this slide, but our data also show that Black adults and youth are less likely than white and other racial groups to report feeling anxious or depressed. However, due to stigma that surrounds behavioral health in the Black community, depression, anxiety, and other mental health symptoms may be underreported. So in reality, it could be that Black residents are feeling more depressed and anxious compared to white residents. Due to the effects of COVID-19, when we do our next community health needs assessment in 2025, we will most likely see significantly higher rates for these indicators and others related to behavioral health and substance use, as we know from recent national surveys that more adults and youth are experiencing more anxiety and depression, and there is an uptick in substance use. Knowing what we know about the importance of a healthy body and mind, we must work to remove the stigma that's so closely attached to behavioral health in the Black community. Fortunately, there are many ways we can promote health and wellness in the Black community and minimize health disparities that will lead to better outcomes. Some of these may seem easier to do than others, but each are very important components to reversing some of the trends I've shown you today. The first and perhaps most important strategy is to address the social determinants of health. These are all the factors that influence one's health, such as socioeconomic status, education, and neighborhoods, which have more of an impact on health than one's own health behaviors. There are many entities such as healthcare, community-based organizations, and local government that are working to improve social conditions for people in Tacoma and Pierce County that address inequities, which will help them attain their highest level of health. This large body of work cannot be done in silos. We must work across sectors and involve the people in the community to plan and develop innovative, impactful solutions. We also must consider developing more effective messaging and education around behavioral health and substance use that really resonate with the Black community. Again, the stigma associated with behavioral health is very powerful and prevents people from talking about it or even admitting that they may have a problem out of shame and embarrassment. As well, it's alarming that Black youth are the most likely to use marijuana. We must educate our youth about the harmful effects of marijuana and other substances. To address health disparities in the Black community, healthcare organizations must continue the work to earn the community's trust. This work involves authentic relationship building, involving community when developing, implementing, and evaluating health programs, and actively listening to the community's needs. It also means that healthcare organizations sustain the relationship with the community over time and not exit the community once a project or program is over. Earning the community's trust also involves addressing bias in healthcare. Ongoing implicit bias training must be made available to healthcare providers and staff to promote self-reflection. We all have biases, including healthcare providers, but it's important to recognize what they are so we can mitigate them. It's also important for staff to have safe spaces to talk about the effects of bias in healthcare delivery and how they might support one another in minimizing its harmful effects on patients. Another way we can address disparities is by increasing the diversity of providers in our community, including behavioral health therapists. Research has shown that a diverse healthcare workforce that closely matches the diversity of the community leads to better health outcomes for patients of color. Many patients of color feel it's important that their provider understands them and their culture and may be more comfortable with a provider that shares their racial or cultural identity. MultiCare offers a great youth program aimed at increasing the diversity of our healthcare workforce. The MultiCare Academy for Students in Healthcare Camp, otherwise known as MASH Camp, is a one-week program in the summer that exposes high school students to a variety of health professions and provides them with hands-on experiences. The Healthcare Careers Academy is another great program that exposes high school students to healthcare careers. It's offered at 2 high schools within the Tacoma Public School District. This program helps students build skills necessary for a career in healthcare, provides hands-on activities, and prepares students for college. If you know a student who is interested or might be interested in healthcare, please share these programs with them. We need more Black youth to pursue degrees in healthcare and science to become the next generation of healthcare professionals that care for our community. And lastly, we still have opportunities for fighting COVID. Despite mask mandates being lifted, COVID is not gone and will likely be with us in the foreseeable future. The best way to prevent severe illness from COVID and hospitalization is to get vaccinated. COVID vaccines are available right now for anyone who is 5 years old and over. As I mentioned, only 58.5% of Black residents in Pierce County are either partially or fully vaccinated against COVID. Please continue to encourage others to get their COVID vaccine, and if you received yours already, it's important to share your why when you have these conversations. Your reason why you got vaccinated might just resonate with others and motivate them to get vaccinated as well. This concludes my report on healthcare. Thank you so much for listening. Take care and be well.
Every American deserves to live in safe, decent, affordable, energy-efficient housing on fair terms, including the residents of Tacoma. Tonight, we are going to discuss the state of Black Tacoma as it relates to housing, and that report will be presented by Felicia Medlin with the City of Tacoma. Felicia, thank you for joining us. We're so excited to hear your report tonight.
So one of the first things I want to talk to you about is the importance of housing. Housing is really at the center of quality of life. It leads to, access to jobs, depending on where your housing is located, quality of life, and also looking at access to community facilities, infrastructure, and other amenities that you might want to have access to, like entertainment, schools, that sort of thing. And then health is one of the components that's being looked at more and more as a contributing factor of how your housing can contribute to your overall health. And then from the city perspective, housing as a service that the city provides is also something that can increase trust and belief in government overall based on how we deliver those services to the residents of the city. So really diving in and looking at the impact of housing as it relates to Black residents in the city of Tacoma, I want to highlight the demographic makeup of Black residents in Tacoma is about 3 times as much as the state overall, which is something we don't see across any other demographics. The other demographics are very closely aligned with the proportion from a state perspective. And so what that means when I get into some additional slides here is what we're gonna see is any disparity or disproportionate impact as it relates to housing is gonna essentially show up 3 times as high across the Black population. And so that's something, just having that really basic statistic in mind as we talk about those things just shows how a small impact really is magnified into greater visibility of that impact just based on the proportion of the population in the city of Tacoma that is Black or African American. So looking at inequities in home ownership, home ownership is the specific type of housing that we want to talk about today. We know that housing need across the city is really great right now on the rental side and the home ownership side. We have a significant amount of folks experiencing homelessness. But for the purposes of this presentation, I really want to focus on home ownership. Home ownership is something the city has done, recently conducted a disparity study on, and what we wanted to look at through this disparity study was the impact or the ability for a Black resident in the city of Tacoma to obtain the outcome of home ownership. And so I have a graph in front of you right now, and what this graph really shows is the contrast of the rate of home ownership across several demographics within the city of Tacoma. And so what we see here is a trend that is unique, negatively unique, I will add, within the Black population, of a stark decline in the rate of home ownership. And we see that stark decline starts to happen at about 2009. So housing bubble. And so there are some underlying trends and things that were happening that has led to this stark decline starting in 2009. And the continued decline, we, as a Black community, have not been able to rebound from some of the things we've experienced during that time and as we move forward. And so the issues and the reasons or the how we got here, it's very complex. We're looking at marginalization from a early age. The odds are stacked against or have been stacked against the Black community. And so we kind of start out a couple steps behind, or several steps behind, quite frankly. And so we're looking at discriminatory practices in real estate and in planning. So looking at the practice of steering, so real estate agents only taking Black families to certain areas of a city, keeping them away from certain areas, and then also the systemic practice of redlining, which, even though it's illegal to do today, the remnants of that practice still are still evident with where Black households are choosing to live or ultimately able to achieve home ownership versus the historic redlined jurisdictions. And we're also looking at other predatory lending practices and mortgage application denials. And the reasons for those denials are really high among Black residents of Tacoma and those seeking to enter the housing market in Tacoma for reasons like credit history, poor credit history, not having a lot of liquid assets, which means their debt to income ratio is going to be really high, which are all reasons that those applications have been denied and are disproportionately denied among Black applicants. So now we're going to take a look at how we combat those inequities. So I talked a little bit about how we got here, the systemic practices, the lending practices, and everything that kind of created the current situation that we're in. And so now we want to look at how we move forward and some of the current actions the city is taking to actually make that forward movement a reality. So one of the key things we had to do to get started was conduct a disparity study. And so what this study does was it made all of the anecdotal information that we have and that we know to be true, it tied that to hard data. And we need that data, that connection from anecdotal data to the qualitative and quantitative data to really be able to start changing policy and directing resources towards the Black community in a very meaningful and intentional way. And so there are 5 categories of activities that we're looking at to be able to start moving things forward. One of them is increasing supply. We want to change the way we engage and support more diverse households. There's just a different way. There are cultural differences, there's systematic differences, and so we need to be addressing those and taking those into consideration when we're trying to provide services and supports to households in a way that they will continue to engage versus having negative experiences that turn them off completely and cause them to just not seek further assistance or further engagement with us. We also want to keep people in their homes. So looking at ways that we can support existing homeowners, whether it's through providing ways for them to make improvements to their home so that, if their roof is falling in and leaking, or if they have plumbing problems, that if they aren't able to fix may cause them to have to leave their home. So making sure they have what they need to be able to make those repairs, and also looking at foreclosure prevention and mortgage assistance. So making sure folks who may be struggling for a couple of months or have an unforeseen circumstance happening, that they have some support and some programming to be able to help them kind of just weather that storm and get through and successfully maintain their home ownership. Alternative home ownership options is another one. So the city's Home in Tacoma work is really expanding where some alternative home ownership options could happen. So I'm thinking duplexes, triplexes, condos, townhomes, those sorts of housing products versus typical detached single family, where you have to also buy the land and the structure that's situated on the land. So community land trust is also something that comes up whenever we talk about alternative home ownership options. And that's a way to keep home ownership at a low cost because we take the value of the land out of the equation. And then lastly, we're looking at establishing equity targets and equity goals for our home ownership programs. Current action, so we're not waiting. We're doing things now to help tackle some of these issues and also move forward. There's still a lot of work to do, and we are dedicated and committed to continuing to do the work. So right now, the city has a single-family rehab program, a down payment assistance program, and a foreclosure prevention program. So what we're going to be looking at is are ways to expand that programming and really target that programming to the households that we know need it the most. And so targeted marketing approach, as well as being able to expand those existing programs. And then this is the area where you all can help. So looking at partnerships and opportunities to partner to do this work. We know there's a lot of organizations out there in the community, the lending community, the real estate community. There are a lot of folks out there who are already doing this work or who are really wanting to engage with us and do this work. And so you can expect, as we continue to try to evolve our programming and be more intentional about our service provision as it relates to housing, we want your help. We want your voice to be a part of this. And so we will be reaching out to a variety of organizations and folks in the community. If you get some information forwarded to you, my request and ask is that you not delete it right away, that you take a couple moments to read that. Reach out to me. I'm definitely available, and I know housing is a very complex topic, but we're here to hopefully, make it less complex and help it make more sense for people as it relates to the programs and the efforts that the city has underway to improve the housing environment for all people who want to call the city of Tacoma home, with some specific emphasis on our Black residents who we know are being disproportionately impacted in their housing outcomes. Once again, I'm Felicia Medlin. I'm the Housing Division Manager with the City of Tacoma. I can be reached at fmedlin@cityoftacoma.org, again, for any questions you might have for housing. If I don't have the answers, I can get you in contact with some folks who do. So thanks for tuning in.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jay Thomas. I'm a program officer with Group Health Foundation. Our mission is to ensure equity and racial justice across Washington and beyond. We're extremely proud to support the Tacoma Urban League and so grateful for their unwavering commitment to equity and all the ways they strengthen and empower Tacoma's African American community. We're committed to deep listening and community-driven research, and this evening's event is an opportunity for all of us to learn more. So we want to thank the Tacoma Urban League for hosting the State of Black Tacoma, and all of you for joining in.
Hello, I'm Ivy Reeves Jr., Senior Area Retail Leader for KeyBank in South Puget Sound. As a longtime volunteer and advocate for the Tacoma Urban League, I am proud of the work that is being done in our area to support Black and urban entrepreneurs. KeyBank proudly provided a large grant to the Small Business Navigator program designed to support Black and help Black entrepreneurs expand their businesses. Our mission at KeyBank is to help our local community thrive, and small businesses are part of the very fabric of a thriving community. We make it a priority to give back to organizations that help prepare people for their futures by providing participants with valuable skills and connections to grow their businesses. This program has a broad ripple effect, helping entrepreneurs, their families, and their local community. Congratulations to the entire Tacoma Urban League team, volunteers, donors, and supporters. And congratulations to all the entrepreneurs who will have an opportunity to expand their businesses because of this great program. We are excited to do even a small part to help support this important work. Thank you.
We are very fortunate to have Workforce Central in our community. We know that every American should have access to employment, to good benefits, and a livable wage. Tonight, Katie Condit will present the State of Black Tacoma on workforce development, and we are thrilled to hear the gaps, gains, and opportunities for growth as it relates to employment here in our community. Thank you, Katie. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you for the opportunity to share a bit about the State of Black Tacoma and workforce development. I'm Katie Condit, CEO for Workforce Central, and the aim of our organization is to bridge the gaps between job seekers and businesses in a way that leads to self-sufficiency and thriving for Pierce County residents. I'll start by saying that the state of Black communities in Tacoma in general from a workforce perspective is strong and resilient. I would go so far as to say that Black communities in Tacoma frankly have modeled and led through the pandemic for the rest of us how to build and sustain community connection and also economic vitality in some really innovative ways. What's compelling and what we're witnessing in workforce development is that this work is being led by and for the community, pushing back on this false narrative that top-down agencies are the best way to serve communities. We've seen this resilience and strength play out in unmistakable community organizing and support that took place over the course of the pandemic, the surge in Black business ownership over the last 2 years, and the design and implementation of innovative programs that focus on upskilling and reskilling community members of color and supporting them into good wage jobs. Where we still frankly have work to do is in the state of the systems that are intended to support our communities and in the inequities those systems continue to perpetuate in things like wages, job quality, unintended deficit language, and overall access to meaningful work in Tacoma. As you can see in the first slide that we have, the median wage for workers who identify as Black and African American is about $32,400 versus a $40,000 average overall. The gap is even greater when we compare that wage to white, non-Hispanic, and Latino workers, who earned a median wage of $45,000 per year. So that's an obvious disparity in the workforce that we can't ignore. Other disparities are things like job quality, job access, and job type. In this next slide, you'll see a high-level example of how people tend to be concentrated in different sectors by race, with far greater numbers of white people in higher-paying management and business roles compared to service occupations, for example, while the rates of participation in each of these sectors is far less variable for Black workers in Pierce County. Encouragingly, in workforce development, we're seeing employers in Tacoma really start to interrogate their own policies and practices around hiring and retention, going from this idea of hiring for comfort and assimilation and being the right fit for a business to recognizing that this mentality keeps teams and opportunities for promotion and leadership squarely in line with dominant culture thinking about the way things have always been done. And that narrow thinking in business and hierarchy and the way we assess skills has some pretty implicit bias baked into it that was designed by white people. So it's significant in Tacoma to see employers shifting to thinking about hiring for integration of diverse perspectives and different lived experiences, and then seeing the immediate payoffs and impact that truly diverse teams bring to a business. And we're ultimately seeing employers placing increasing value on cultures of care and belonging as really core retention strategies for employment. These are things to celebrate in Tacoma. I'd love to highlight other few key areas for celebration for the state of Black Tacoma, specifically in workforce development. There has been an amplification and prioritization of investments in communities of color in this realm on many fronts. The governor's office in Washington was the first in the country to formally include Black, Indigenous, Latin, AAPI, and other communities of color as priority populations for the millions of dollars that we invest in our workforce systems. So here in Tacoma, that gave Workforce Central the means to invest, for example, upwards of $500,000 in an incredible training program that serves 100% youth of color. That program's called Palmer Pathways. It's an evidence-based training program that supports youth of color into good wage trades jobs. Jobs that typically have high barriers to access, especially for Black workers, and that are typically dominated by white males. In addition to this program and multiple other exciting training programs, we've seen Black business ownership surge in the last couple years. It currently sits at above 30% pre-pandemic levels in the country, and this is reflected in Pierce County and Tacoma as well. Continued investments in strategies and programs that are designed by and for Black Tacomans, like the BIPOC Business Accelerator Fund, these youth training programs we're talking about, and all the other community-driven work, coupled with the overall strength and resilience and drive that has frankly always existed and is truly reflective of Black communities in Tacoma, that's what's going to continue to dismantle so many of the inequities that we see baked in our workforce development systems. These investments are critical and ensure that the state of Black Tacoma, through the lens of workforce development, stays strong in the years to come. Last but not least, we are all recognizing that a diverse workforce is directly tied to economic growth and stability for the entire community, and so it's a worthwhile priority. Thank you again for having me here, and I really look forward to our continued learning as an organization for Workforce Central in terms of the ways we can best support the vision and priorities of Black communities in Tacoma.
The number one challenge facing 80% of our small businesses is access to capital. Every single business in our community should be able to offer great benefits and a living wage to community members. This is why we launched our Small Business Support Navigator position at Tacoma Urban League with a focus on helping our small businesses to launch and grow. Tonight, we will hear the state of Black Tacoma as it relates to Black-owned businesses. That report will be presented by Janephanis Tucker with the Seattle Credit Union. Thank you for joining us tonight, Janephanis.
The state of Black Tacoma businesses. So we all know that Black business owners face challenges on many fronts. These challenges were made worse by the pandemics. There's a growing understanding that barriers to advancement have been systemic and layered, right? When Black business owners have access to the resources, the information, and the tools they need, we know they can and will succeed. Our group, Black-Owned Business Excellence, was organized by volunteers. We came together to identify the needs in the community and create resources for those needs. So we were able to identify certain gaps, and we made a list of all of those gaps, and we made a list of all of the resource partners that could possibly address those gaps. So supporting Black-owned business excellence is one of the best ways to go from awareness to action, and supporting your local community and tearing down barriers that have been caused by systemic racism. Black-owned business owners gained this last year. So one of the things that I think they've truly gained is a presence, being seen and heard by organizations and systems that normally have ignored us, right? We've also gained connection. So there's been a great sense of connection to other Black-owned businesses and the resources that are available to us. right? Community resources and connecting have been the most supportive for Black-owned businesses in 2021. The educational resources and technical assistance are working well in our ecosystem. Being involved in the conversations that are being had around the different tables are significant to change and being drivers of change. So there are robust gaps that still exist for Black-owned business owners. And those come in the form of government contracting, proper business registration and licensing, access to capital, growth strategies, and guidance. These are all gaps that we've identified that require additional work by us and the community at large. One of the reasons why Black-owned business excellence was started is because we identified that most of the Black-owned business owners didn't know about PPP or the EIDL loan or even working Washington grants or different ways that they were able to get support. So what happened as a result, we sat down and we said, how do we fix this problem? How do we help these Black-owned businesses gain this access and gain this support? And so we decided to do our symposiums, which we have annually, but quarterly we have events that are geared around education and celebration and also networking. In addition to our events, we have weekly meetings. And our weekly meetings, what we do is we talk about the issues that are going on in our community and how we can help to solve them by having a collective voice. Not the same voice, but a collective voice. Many of us saying or establishing what the issues are and then finding solutions that are in the community and working within those resources to be able to solve those issues. The pandemics had both positive and negative impacts on the development of Black-owned businesses. While there are a lot of businesses that closed and got declinations from the PPP loans or the EIDL loans or the Working Washington grants or all of those things, I want to focus on the positive. This virtual environment has been super beneficial. And it's been real, true business growth for a lot of businesses across Tacoma. For example, Quickie 2. They decided in the middle of the pandemic, after being shut down, open up, shut down, open up, they decided, you know what? We are only going to serve our clients virtually. We're only going to serve through the window that they put in place to be able to serve quicker and touchless. Prior to the pandemic, they were not doing that. You had to call or you had to go into there and place your order, whether you were sitting, dining in, or leaving. They didn't really have a virtual presence, an online presence. But what COVID-19 and the different pandemics did for them is it helped them to accelerate their plans to have a virtual presence. And they were able to generate more money than they had in the previous 10, 14 years that they were in business. So that business growth was exponential. And I will say, and that's Quickie 2 on the hilltop of Tacoma. Then there's another business, Coastal Maintenance Solutions. They saw tremendous business growth. They were able to employ folks from the community to address the contracts that they were getting as a result of them becoming certified as a women-owned business, as a minority-owned business, as a disadvantaged business. So the fact that they got those certifications, they were able to get more contracts and employ more people. And so there's been tremendous benefits to the pandemics as well as the negative aspects of the pandemic. So we can successfully create a more equitable entrepreneurial ecosystem in Tacoma and Washington State through exposure, access, and inclusion, especially at the policy level. So recognizing the division and calling it out and making conscious efforts to be more inclusive and collaborative, that's how we change the landscape for Black-owned businesses in Tacoma. So the future of Black-owned businesses in Tacoma is excellence. It's unity, it's collaboration, it's inspiration, it's elevation, it's motivation, and it's celebration. But it takes all of us collectively to make that happen.
This year, we are relaunching our Reclaim Your Vote campaign because it is your voice, your power, and our democracy, and we must do everything that we can to protect that democracy. And this means showing up and voting and being civically engaged. Tonight, we'll talk about the state of Black Tacoma as it relates to civic engagement, and we're so honored to have our county auditor, Julie Anderson, present that report tonight. Auditor Anderson, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
It's worth a look back to 2020 because a lot of things happened about civic engagement in the city of Tacoma. The 2020 census, the decennial census, was an absolute hit, thanks in part to the people watching this video today. The city of Tacoma displayed exceptional leadership. The gold standard for the census is the self-response rates. That's all the households in our community that respond to the census survey without having an enumerator come knock at their door. Those results are more accurate, more timely, so it's really the gold standard. And in this 2020 decennial census, Washington State tied for third in the nation for self-response rates. And Pierce County, right here at home, we tied for 10th in Washington State. And the city of Tacoma just rocked it. That means that everybody that is in this map was a leader in the nation. Look at the improvement over the years. So let's look back at 2010, because this was our benchmark. When we kicked off the 2020 census, we were really concerned about hard-to-reach populations. And if you look at this map, the deep blue colors have the most saturation, the highest levels of self-response. The lighter colors, not so well. We were deeply concerned about being able to reach those light census tracts that had a low rate of self-response in 2010. Here we are in 2020. Our map definitely deepened, but you can still see some of the residual effects. So you can still see Hilltop, South Tacoma, and some pockets on the east side still had a relatively lower self-response rate, just like they did in 2010. So there's improvement, but there's still some gains that need to be made. And then look back is also deserved for the general election 2020, where lots of data was gathered. Again, we did a great job as a community in that general election, fighting through COVID and having a record-breaking turnout despite the challenges we were facing. The entire community was really activated. We broke a 40-year record that was set in 2004, and we had an 82% turnout. But, you know, turnout is never equal for everybody, is it? This is a graph that I've shown in prior presentations. It's a reliable longitudinal graph that shows voter turnout gap by race, and it's been updated with those 2020 results. The top line up there is Asian voters, the second line, Latino, the third, other than white, and the fourth is Black voters. So the good news is Black voters do the absolute best at closing the gap with white voters. But you can see that there are some really remarkable patterns there. From a high point of disengagement in 2004, and then really closing the gap in 2008, which was President Barack Obama's initial campaign, and coming really just within 1 percentage point of white voters. And then something happened during the midterms where disengagement and his, more traditional turnout trends came back. And then a huge year defending the presidency of Barack Obama and getting him a second term, where Black voters outperformed white voters. But then lapsing into the disengagement again. And here we are in 2020. So one of the things that this chart, some of the questions that this brings up for me, and I'm sure for you as well, is what is happening with these really steep peaks and valleys among Black voters? Is it the price of voting? Is it the presence or absence of a really engaging Black candidate that's inspiring? Or are those recessions back in those midterm years about that it's hard to sustain the level of engagement because voting is too hard? Now, I do want to point out that these statistics are from census survey results, and they are not specific to Tacoma or Pierce County. But they're fairly predictable and fairly accurate. So you can see in this chart that Black voters in Washington state appear to have underperformed Black voters on an average in the United States by quite a bit, by anywhere from 8 to 10%. But do keep in mind that the smaller the sample size, the larger the margin of error. And so the margin of error could account for some pretty big swings. The audience will remember that in 2018, Washington state passed its own Voting Rights Act. Now, this act was focused primarily on redistricting and vote dilution and polarized voting. And it was great to have it in place for our redistricting that was just completed. We just redrew legislative and congressional lines. But in the last session in 2022, there was an expansion to that Voting Rights Act proposed, really like part 2 or phase 2. And this bill would have placed emphasis on election practices and laws and really focused on ensuring that there was no denial or abridgment of the right to vote in Washington state. So the 2018 bill that passed and the 2022 bill that was proposed, taken together, if the 2022 bill had passed, would have created a more complete Voting Rights Act for Washington state, more similar to what we're used to relying on for the federal National Voting Rights Act. I believe that the Voting Rights Act in Washington state, that this expansion will eventually pass. You'll recall it took quite a while for the 2018 Voting Rights Act to pass. So there's an opportunity to refine it. But in the meantime, a good thing did happen. One of the elements of this expansion bill was provided for in the governor's budget as a proviso. So the University of Washington will be funded and has been instructed to begin assembling a data repository and doing some data analysis. This will give us a really nice set of benchmarks when the Voting Rights Act is passed. And certainly election administrators like myself will appreciate having that data held and analyzed by a trusted third party. So Pierce County elections, when we were looking at the 2022 Voting Rights Act expansion, did a quick look around. The bill actually calls for, you'll recognize the term covered jurisdiction. So a covered jurisdiction under the Washington's proposal would have been any community or jurisdiction with a threshold of 10% of more protected classes. So we took a quick look around, back of the envelope, with, if you will, about the cities and towns in Pierce County that would cover. I don't think any of us are surprised that the city of Tacoma would have been deemed a covered jurisdiction. And actually, let's go back and think about that a while. So the city of Tacoma is certainly the largest jurisdiction. And by being covered, it means that any changes in election practices would have to be pre-cleared. And in the bill, the pre-clearance would be conducted by the Washington State Attorney General's office, or as an alternate, you could go to Superior Court in Thurston County to ask for permission to change the election practices. Now, practically, it means things like moving a ballot drop box, or opening a new voting center in these jurisdictions. Those are some simple examples of things that would require pre-clearance in these covered jurisdictions. So Tacoma is the largest, and we identified a total of 9 cities and towns in Pierce County that would be covered. I think there's a special opportunity here while we are watching the Voting Rights Act expansion work its way through the legislature to start some early conversations, because you'll notice that 6 of the 9 covered populations actually are contiguous. So the city of Tacoma, Fircrest, University Place, Lakewood, I don't think that's a surprise, Steilacoom, and DuPont, all covered jurisdictions with contiguous borders that, if you will, could be considered one community, a lot of diversity inside those communities. But we could gather together elected officials, community leaders, and really take a deep dive into the Washington Voting Rights Act proposal and discuss in a very clear-eyed way what it means and what we would like to get out of it. So we talked earlier about voter turnout and the great engagement that we had with the census and with the 2020 election, but what kind of votes are being left on the table? Some of you may have read a very recent news story that the state auditor's office did an audit of all of the rejected ballots in Washington state. They were asked by the state legislature to conduct that analysis. And they looked at the highest and the lowest rejection rates in Washington state. Pierce County was not among one of the 10 counties that was studied because we fall kind of right in the middle in terms of our rejection rates. And for those of you that haven't read the report or the news stories, let me provide some baseline context. Every election, approximately 2% of the ballots returned will be flagged as rejected. Most of those are going to be ballots returned too late. But there are a sizable number of ballots that are rejected because the voter forgot to sign the ballot or the signature does not match. So they're challenged for signature issues. The state auditor's office really focused in on that because whether you're late or not, that's kind of a binary thing. You either made the deadline or you didn't. But the signature review process is very human, and there are some variations across the counties. So they really did a deep dive there. And what they found, I don't think will be surprising, is that the ballots of younger voters were rejected at a much higher rate than older voters. And election administrators have a hypothesis there. It's that younger voters really have not had a chance to, first of all, they're not being taught cursive in school. They're very much digital natives, and they haven't had the life experience to develop like a signature. They don't sign many legal documents at that age, up to 21 or even 25. We don't even use our fingers anymore at the grocery store to sign off on purchases, so people don't have an opportunity to develop their signatures. And their style is always changing. Also, young voters tend to be very active in presidential elections, but then go away and don't participate for 4 years. So the fact that they're infrequent voters and then they haven't had a chance to practice with their signature explains a lot, but we're still worried about it. The other finding is that the ballots of white voters were rejected at a lower rate than those of other racial groups and ethnic groups. And you can see here that black voters are hit particularly hard. Now, this is just an estimation because you know that we don't register to vote and you don't list your race or ethnicity or your language. And you certainly, we certainly don't have that information when we're processing your ballots, right? So this is just an estimate used by the state auditor's office, but it's probably a good estimate. Importantly, the state auditor's office didn't find any, they had a hard time finding any patterns or theories for why this was happening, and they didn't find any evidence of implicit or unconscious bias of the election workers that were checking the signatures. But all the same, election officials, and I think all of us, are concerned about any kind of differential. We don't want any votes left on the table, especially for something that seems like a technicality. After all, if you went to the trouble of getting registered, getting a vote, and getting a ballot and returning the ballot to us, that means you really want to vote and you have something to say. So we don't like rejecting ballots for unmatched signatures. Auditors are really looking forward to finding technology that might provide an alternative to a signature for voter verification. Who knows what form that might come in, but we are looking in earnest for an alternative. And finally, this may not be my news to share, but we're involved, so I'll share it anyway. Equity index mapping. For those of you that have been involved in my office in elections, you know that we have been looking at patterns of voter registration, ballot returns, and mapping those against equity indices for a few years now. Very much the same work that you do to get ready for the census. But I'm happy to say that equity mapping has gotten extremely popular and powerful, and the city of Tacoma is leading the way, and Pierce County is joining in. So we will now have comprehensive maps that include the city and the county, and Metro Parks, Pierce Transit, Health Department, Tacoma Public Utilities, and I may be missing some, are all on a working group making sure that we agree on what it is that we're measuring and how we're mapping it. So this is under construction, but will be available in 2023. And I think we're going to have a lot of utility out of this for many, many purposes. But we're looking forward to this in elections particularly. So we saw some really clear gains in our decennial census results. We see gains in voter turnout, but there are some gaps in the turnout for mid-year elections and other off-year elections, especially local elections. And there's a great opportunity for community conversations and collaboration around the Voting Rights Act and what it could mean if passed for our communities. We can get ready for that. There's also an opportunity to study data that has a much more uniform mapping that we can use to make decisions together as a community. Thank you.
Every year, I look forward to the State of Black Tacoma event. It is the perfect opportunity to hear the gains that we have made as it relates to the Black community here in Tacoma, the gaps that still exist, but also the opportunities for growth, which means that we must take action. This year is no different. After this event, it's time for us to get to work. I invite you all to join us in our work at Tacoma Urban League. You can learn more about us at thetacomaurbανleague.org. I again want to invite you to connect with the speakers from tonight and get involved with the work that they do in education, employment, civic engagement, healthcare, housing, or small business support. Thank you to all of you who viewed tonight, and thank you to our many sponsors who made this event possible. Tacoma Urban League is here to serve community. We are committed to empowering communities and changing lives every single day. I wish you all a wonderful evening, and again, thank you for attending our 4th annual State of Black Tacoma. Lastly, but not least, I want to make sure that I thank my incredible board of directors here at Tacoma Urban League and the incredible staff and volunteers and members who get the work done on behalf of Tacoma Urban League and have been committed to this work for over 50 years. Thank you all, past and present, so very much. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.